They say that when a marriage hits a rough patch, taking a break can save it. Sophie called it a pause. Like we were just putting the movie of our life on hold to catch our breath. She made it sound temporary, harmless, even wise. I didn't argue. I was exhausted from the endless fights about money, time, and the 1,000 little disappointments that had piled up over 12 years of marriage. We had 2 kids. Lily was 10, Noah 7, and every argument seemed to circle back to them. So when Sophie suggested we step back to figure out what we want, I agreed. I stayed in our house with the kids. She moved into a small apartment across town. I told myself it was for the best for the family. I told myself she just needed space. In the beginning, I believed it. We talked on the phone every night, made plans for family dinners on weekends, kept up appearances for the kids. She sounded tired but calm, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we were healing. But then the calls got shorter. Then they stopped altogether. Weekends, with the kids, turned into quick visits or sudden cancellations because she was overwhelmed. One night, Lily asked me why Mommy wasn't coming home. She was holding her stuffed rabbit, the one Sophie bought when Lily was born. I didn't know what to say. I told her Mommy just needed some time. But inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. That doubt turned into certainty 2 weeks later. A friend of mine saw Sophie downtown, not alone, but with Marcus Hayes, a guy from her office I'd met once at a company barbecue. Tall, well-dressed, charming in that slick way that made my skin crawl. My friend didn't want to tell me at first, but when I pressed, he admitted they looked like more than friends. I wanted to confront her. God, I wanted to storm over to that apartment and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the kids asleep in their rooms, or the voice in my head saying if I exploded now, I'd lose them too. So instead, I stayed quiet. I tucked my anger away and waited. When Sophie finally came home 3 months later, she cried. She admitted she'd made mistakes, said Marcus didn't mean anything, begged me to forgive her for the sake of our children. I should have kicked her out that night. But I looked at Lily and Noah, and I thought about broken homes and custody battles and all the damage we'd already done. Against every instinct, I forgave her. For a while, it seemed to work. Sophie moved back in. We did family dinners again. Even took a vacation to the coast where the kids built sand castles and Sophie and I held hands like we used to. I wanted to believe we were fixed. I needed to believe it. But 2 years later, the cracks started showing again. Late nights at the office. Secretive texts. Smiles that didn't reach her eyes. I recognized every sign because I'd seen them before. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore them. While Sophie thought she was hiding her second affair with Marcus, I was already preparing for the endgame. I learned everything I could about divorce law, custody, and asset protection. Quietly, without tipping her off, I met with attorneys, rewrote financial agreements, moved funds into protected accounts. I even set up hidden cameras to catch her sneaking out at night. I didn't yell. I didn't confront her. I played the dutiful husband, waiting for the moment when she'd finally pushed too far. Because this time, I wasn't going to let her walk back in with tears and apologies. This time, I wasn't forgiving anything. People always imagine revenge as this fiery, dramatic thing, shouting matches, slammed doors, a man throwing his wife's clothes out onto the lawn while the neighbors watch. But that's not real revenge. Real revenge is quiet, calculated, the kind that lets the other person think they're safe while you're already building the trap they'll never escape. After I forgave Sophie the first time, I promised myself one thing. If she ever betrayed me again, I'd never let her destroy me a second time. So when the familiar signs crept back in, I stayed calm and careful. I didn't want to hurt the kids, and I knew that any rash move would just make things worse. At first, it was little things. Sophie started working late again. Not the occasional late night. Whole stretches of evenings where she wouldn't be home until after midnight. She'd claim there was a new project at her firm, long meetings with clients. But when I asked for details, she'd snap at me, accusing me of not trusting her. I recognized that defensiveness. I'd seen it during the pause 2 years earlier. I didn't argue. Instead, I began quietly tracking everything. I synced her phone's location to our shared family account, something she'd forgotten I still had access to. The first week, it showed her at the office late at night. The second week, her phone pinged from a small condo on the east side of town. Marcus's address. The moment I saw it, my chest tightened like I'd been punched. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that it was some fluke. But as the nights stacked up, the truth became undeniable. Sophie wasn't working late. She was back with Marcus. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I met with a divorce attorney recommended by a friend who'd gone through something similar. The attorney was blunt. If you want custody, you need proof. If you want to keep your assets, you need to move them now. Don't tip her off until everything's ready. That became my mission. I met with financial planners under the guise of planning for the kids' college funds. We shifted money into accounts Sophie couldn't touch. I rewrote my will. I transferred partial ownership of our house to a trust for Lily and Noah, making it legally impossible for Sophie to force a sale or claim full ownership in a divorce. Meanwhile, I started gathering evidence. I installed small cameras at home, not to spy on Sophie with the kids, but to catch her lies. One camera faced the garage, another the front door. Every night she claimed to be working late. I'd see her leaving hours earlier in different clothes. I even hired a private investigator. It felt dirty, like I was violating something sacred, but I reminded myself she'd already done that to us. The PI followed Sophie for 3 weeks, documenting every visit to Marcus's condo, every overnight stay, every hand-holding stroll through quiet neighborhoods. All the while, at home, I played the part of the husband trying to make things work. I cooked dinners for the kids, helped with homework, tucked them in at night. I smiled at Sophie when she came home, pretending not to notice her showering before bed or sneaking out again early in the morning. But inside, a different version of me was taking shape, one that wasn't just hurt, but prepared. This time, there would be no forgiveness. The breaking point came on Lily's birthday. She turned 11, and Sophie swore, that she'd be there for the whole party. She even helped plan it, choosing the cake and decorations. But halfway through the celebration, while Lily was blowing out candles, Sophie slipped outside to take a call. I followed her, quietly, out to the driveway. From the shadows, I watched her lean against her car, laughing softly into her phone. I heard Marcus's name. I saw the way she smiled, not the tired smile she gave me, but a bright, electric grin I hadn't seen since before our marriage started cracking. Something inside me hardened then. That was the moment I knew we were done. She wasn't just making a mistake anymore. This was who she was. And if I didn't protect myself and the kids, we'd all drown with her. After the party, when the kids were asleep, I sat in the garage with the divorce papers already half prepared. My lawyer had drawn them up weeks ago, waiting for me to give the green light. I stared at the stack of evidence I'd collected: photos, videos, GPS logs, investigator reports. It was enough to not only win custody, but to strip Sophie of any chance to use me or the children again. But I didn't file them right away. Timing mattered. Sophie thought she had me fooled. She thought she could live this double life forever. Family at home, Marcus on the side. I wanted her to feel safe, to believe she'd gotten away with it. Because when I finally moved, it had to crush her completely. In the weeks that followed, I perfected the act. I took Sophie out to dinner, planned family outings, even talked about renewing our vows someday. She lapped it up, oblivious to the noose tightening around her neck. One night, as we were putting the kids to bed, Sophie leaned over and whispered, "I'm glad we survived that rough patch. I don't know what I'd do without you." I smiled back, kissed her forehead, and said, "Me too." But in my head, I was already picturing the moment I'd walk into court with every shred of proof, every safeguard in place, ready to take everything back. She had no idea that the man standing beside her wasn't her husband anymore. He was her reckoning. If you'd asked anyone on the outside, they would have said Sophie and I were doing great. To the world, we looked like a couple who'd weathered a storm and come out stronger. Family trips to the lake, date nights at the local Italian place, smiling Christmas cards with the kids. Sophie had perfected her public act long ago, and now I was matching it with one of my own. But behind that picture-perfect facade, every move I made was deliberate. I was still collecting evidence, still shoring up my defenses. My attorney warned me that even with Sophie's history, custody battles can get ugly. Judges like to keep families together if they can. So I needed to make it impossible for anyone to see her as a fit parent. The private investigator came through big. He uncovered not just the ongoing affair with Marcus, but also that Sophie had been using money from our joint account to help Marcus with his own debts, paying his overdue rent, covering his car repairs, even buying him a watch for his birthday that cost more than half our mortgage payment. I had bank statements, receipts, and surveillance footage tying it all together. Still, I played the doting husband. I started taking on even more of the parenting load: school pickups, doctor appointments, PDA meetings. It wasn't hard. I'd been doing most of it anyway during the first pause. But now I made sure teachers, other parents, and even our pediatrician saw me as the stable one. When the time came, there wouldn't be any doubt about which parent Lily and Noah should stay with. Sophie, meanwhile, grew bolder. She stopped hiding her late nights. She'd disappear for whole weekends under flimsy excuses about girls' trips or company retreats. She even started criticizing me in front of the kids, little digs about how I wasn't ambitious enough, how Marcus had real passion for his work. She didn't know I already had voice recordings of these jabs, each one building my case for parental alienation. The turning point came one Friday night when Sophie said she had a work emergency. I told her not to worry, that I'd handle dinner and bedtime. As soon as she left, I called the PI, who was already tracking her car. Less than an hour later, I had a live feed on my phone showing Sophie and Marcus checking into a hotel an hour outside the city. They didn't even bother to hide it anymore. That weekend, while she was away, I took the kids hiking. At the top of a ridge overlooking the valley, Lily said something that stopped me cold. She asked, "Daddy, why does Mommy love Mr. Marcus more than us?" I knelt down, hugged her, and promised her that wasn't true, that Mommy was just confused. But inside, a switch flipped. Sophie wasn't just hurting me anymore. She was damaging our kids. That was the moment I decided to stop waiting. Over the next month, I finalized every detail with my attorney. We drew up a custody agreement that gave me full primary custody, and Sophie only supervised visits until she could prove she was stable. We had ironclad financial protections, ensuring Sophie couldn't touch the trust accounts or the house. I even secured testimony from neighbors who'd seen Marcus coming and going at all hours. When everything was in place, I did something that surprised even me. I planned a romantic weekend getaway with Sophie. I booked a cabin in the mountains, arranged for my sister to watch the kids, even bought her a new dress. She thought it was a reconciliation trip, a sign that we were closer than ever. The night before we left, Sophie stood in front of the mirror, smiling as she tried on the dress. "Maybe we really did make it through," she said softly. I walked up behind her, wrapped my arms around her waist, and met her eyes in the mirror. "Maybe we did," I said, hiding the truth that tomorrow, everything would finally break. The next morning, as we drove into the mountains, Sophie chatted about future plans, renovating the kitchen, taking the kids to Disney next summer. I nodded along, but my mind was elsewhere. This trip wasn't about romance. It was about giving her one last moment of comfort before the world she'd built on lies came crashing down. On the second night, after dinner by the fire, I handed Sophie an envelope. She looked at it, confused. "What's this?" she asked, smiling. "Something I've been meaning to give you," I said. She opened it and pulled out the divorce papers, along with copies of every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Photos, bank statements, hotel records, everything. Her face went pale. Before she could speak, I said, "You've lied to me twice. The first time, I forgave you for the kids. The second time, I built a plan. When we get home, you'll see that I've filed for custody and moved every asset you thought you could take. You and Marcus can have each other, but you won't have our children, and you won't have a dime of what we built." Sophie's hands trembled. "Caleb, please, we can fix this." "No," I cut her off. "You had two chances. I gave you everything. My trust, my forgiveness, my loyalty. And you threw it away. This time, Sophie, there's no coming back." She cried that night in the cabin. For once, I didn't comfort her. I just sat by the fire, staring into the flames, knowing that when we drove home tomorrow, the war she thought she was winning had already been lost. The drive back from the cabin was silent. Sophie stared out the window, her hands clenched in her lap, occasionally wiping away tears. I kept my eyes on the road, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in years, there was no second-guessing, no internal battle over whether to forgive or fight. The decision was made. When we pulled into the driveway, the kids came running out, excited to see us. Sophie put on her usual smile, hugging Lily and Noah as if nothing had happened. I played along too. I didn't want them to sense that their world was about to change. That night, after the kids were in bed, I emailed my attorney the final confirmation. By morning, Sophie would be served. The trap I'd been setting for months was finally closing. The next day, while Sophie was out running errands, a process server arrived at our door and handed her the divorce and custody filings. She stormed inside, waving the papers like a weapon. "What the hell is this, Caleb?" she screamed. "It's the end," I said calmly. You're free to be with Marcus now, but you won't drag the kids through this mess again. You can't do this, she shouted. The house, the accounts, the kids. It's already done, I interrupted, sliding a thick folder across the kitchen table. Inside were copies of every bank transfer to the kids' trusts, property deeds already secured in their names, and financial statements showing that Sophie's attempts to funnel money to Marcus had been traced and documented. You made sure of it when you betrayed us twice. A judge won't leave our children with someone who abandons them to run off with her boyfriend. Sophie's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw real fear, not just guilt or regret. She knew this wasn't a bluff. That evening, Marcus showed up at the house, thinking he could intimidate me into dropping the divorce. I met him on the porch before he even knocked. You need to leave, I told him. He smirked. Laura says you're bluffing. She says you'll back down, just like last time. Try me, I said, stepping closer. The only reason you're not getting dragged into this legally is because I want my kids to see me as better than you. But if you come near this house again, I'll make sure every employer you ever dream of working for sees what you've been doing with a married woman and company funds. You think her reputation's bad now? Imagine what happens when yours burns too. Marcus's smirk vanished. He glanced at the window, saw Sophie watching, then backed off without another word. The legal battle that followed was brutal, but I was ready. Sophie's attorney tried every trick, painting me as controlling, suggesting the kids needed their mother more than their father, but the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of her weekend trips with Marcus during our supposed reconciliation, proof of financial misconduct, and testimonies from teachers and neighbors all told the same story. Sophie had checked out of the marriage long ago, and I'd been the one holding the family together. In court, Sophie broke down, sobbing about how much she loved her children and how she'd do anything for another chance. The judge listened patiently, then awarded me full primary custody with Sophie allowed only supervised visitation until she could prove she was stable. When the ruling was read, Sophie looked at me with raw disbelief, as if I'd ripped the ground out from under her. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. He'd abandoned her weeks earlier once the legal trouble started. That night, after we got home, Lily and Noah curled up on the couch beside me. Lily whispered, "Daddy, does this mean we're staying here forever?" I hugged her tight. "Yes, sweetheart. This is our home. We're not going anywhere." For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Sophie had taken so much from us, but she would never again have the chance to rip our family apart. But this story wasn't over. Sophie still had supervised visits, and every time she saw the kids, she tried to worm her way back in, talking about how she'd changed, how we could heal again. I stayed polite for the kids' sake, but inside, I was already planning the final move. Because revenge wasn't just about winning custody or securing the house. It was about making sure Sophie truly understood the cost of what she'd done and ensuring she could never do it again. Winning custody should have felt like the end, but it wasn't. It was only the beginning of Sophie realizing the full weight of what she'd thrown away. She still saw the kids twice a month under supervision, but each visit seemed to make her more desperate. She'd cling to them, whisper promises about coming home soon, try to send me long emails about counseling and starting fresh. I ignored them all, not out of spite, but because I knew this wasn't real remorse. This was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing the family she'd taken for granted twice. And each time I saw that fear, I knew I hadn't finished teaching her the lesson she'd earned. Marcus was already gone. A month after the custody ruling, I learned he'd skipped town, leaving Sophie to face the wreckage alone. He blocked her number, moved out of his condo, and left unpaid debts that she'd foolishly co-signed for. Now she was hounded by creditors and couldn't hold a stable job because every employer saw the legal mess hanging over her. Meanwhile, I focused on the kids. I changed my work schedule to be there when they came home from school, helped them adjust to a life without constant tension, and got them into therapy to talk through everything they'd seen and heard. Lily stopped asking why Mommy wasn't around as much. Noah started smiling again. For the first time, our house felt safe. But Sophie wouldn't stop. She showed up at Lily's soccer game one Saturday without permission, crying from the stands, trying to run onto the field. Security had to escort her out while other parents stared. The kids were rattled for weeks. That's when I knew this had to end, not just legally, but permanently. I met with my attorney again, laying out everything Sophie had done since losing custody, breaking visitation rules, harassing the kids, sending me threatening messages about taking them away. once she got her life back. My attorney said we could petition the court to revoke her visitation entirely, but we'd need ironclad proof that it wasn't safe for the children to be around her. I already had that proof. Months of recorded calls, text messages, and footage from the supervised visits showed Sophie making promises she couldn't keep, bad-mouthing me to the kids, and once even sneaking Marcus's name into a conversation with Noah, as if trying to normalize the man who nearly destroyed our family. We filed the petition quietly. Sophie had no idea it was coming. When the court date arrived, she walked in looking tired, worn down, clutching a photo of Lily and Noah like a shield. She tried to speak about love and redemption, but then we rolled out the evidence. Hours of video and audio that painted a clear picture of instability and manipulation. The judge listened, reviewed the materials, and finally said words that felt like closing a door. Sophie's parental rights would be suspended indefinitely until she completed a long list of requirements: therapy, financial restitution, stable employment, and a psychological evaluation proving she could be a safe presence in the kids' lives. It wasn't just supervised visits anymore. It was nothing. When the decision landed, Sophie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, staring at the table, knowing there was no way she'd meet those requirements anytime soon. She'd lost her children completely, not because I wanted to punish her, but because she'd made every wrong choice twice and dragged innocent lives through her chaos. After the hearing, she tried to approach me in the parking lot. "Caleb, please, you don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I made mistakes, but I love them. I love you. We can fix this." I looked her in the eye, calm and steady. "You had years to fix it. You had second chances. You had my trust. And every time, you chose Marcus over all of us. Now you can choose to fix yourself, but not at their expense. Not anymore." She sobbed, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back and walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had. From that day forward, she faded from our lives. Occasionally, I'd hear about her from distant friends, living in a small apartment, working odd jobs, always talking about getting her kids back someday. But by then, the kids had grown stronger without her. They learned what stability looked like. They saw what resilience really meant. I didn't gloat. Revenge wasn't about parading victory. It was about quiet, permanent consequences. Sophie had thought a pause was a license to betray, that repentance would reset the board, that she could repeat the cycle forever. But this time, there was no reset button. I'd closed every door, locked every window, and left her standing outside the life she once owned, alone. Years passed before I finally allowed myself to believe it was over. In the beginning, even after the court suspended Sophie's parental rights, I kept waiting for her to reappear, to fight again, to drag me and the kids through another round of chaos. But she didn't. Instead, life became normal again. Real normal, not the fragile act we had been putting on for years. Lily entered middle school with a confidence I hadn't seen in her since before the first pause. Noah joined a robotics club and started winning competitions. The house, once filled with tension and whispered arguments, felt warm and safe. I never remarried. I wasn't opposed to the idea, but my focus stayed on raising Lily and Noah, giving them a foundation no one could shake again. We traveled, we laughed, we rebuilt something that looked like peace. For once, my nights were quiet, not from absence, but from the calm of knowing we were finally free. Sophie became a distant shadow. Occasionally, a letter would arrive, handwritten apologies full of promises about therapy, stability, and how much she'd changed. I never responded, not because I was bitter, but because I knew answering would reopen wounds that had finally started to heal. Lily and Noah stopped asking about her. Over time, they stopped mentioning her at all. Then, one day, I ran into Marcus. It had been years since he'd vanished, leaving Sophie to face the fallout alone. I saw him in a grocery store, older, thinner, working as a delivery driver. He froze when he recognized me. I didn't say a word, just gave him a look that told him everything he needed to know. He turned pale and left without buying a thing. That's when it hit me. My revenge had gone further than I ever planned. I hadn't just taken back control of my life. I'd dismantled every part of the world Sophie and Marcus built out of lies. Sophie lost her marriage, her home, her children, and her lover. Marcus lost his reputation, his stability, and his future. They'd both gambled on my forgiveness, on my silence, and discovered too late that I wasn't the same man they thought they could manipulate. But the most surprising part? I didn't feel triumphant. There was no thrill of victory, no cinematic satisfaction. What I felt was quiet resolve, a certainty that I had done what needed to be done, not for revenge's sake, but for my children, for the life they deserved. One evening, years after it all ended, Lily, now a teenager, sat beside me on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. Out of nowhere, she said, "Dad, thank you for keeping us safe, for not letting everything fall apart." I looked at her, seeing the strength and steadiness she carried, and I realized that was the real ending. Not the courtroom victories, not Sophie's downfall, but this moment, a daughter who felt secure, a son who felt loved, and a home no one could rip apart again. I put my arm around Lily's shoulders and said, "That's my job, and I'd do it all again." We sat there in silence, the past finally nothing more than a shadow behind us. Sophie had taken 2 chances and thrown them away, thinking forgiveness was forever. But forgiveness has limits. And when she crossed the line a second time, I didn't just walk away. I made sure she could never drag us back into the storm. That was my revenge. Not rage, not destruction, but permanence. A quiet, unshakable ending that left me and the kids whole, and left Sophie with nothing but the echo of her own choices.